I looked at the calendar with a little bit of horror lately because I realized less than 3 weeks until Thanksgiving. And of course, the snow showing up this morning made it even more real. It is time to start cleaning the house and making the list of guests for Thanksgiving and preparing the grocery list and getting everything ready and making our travel plans. And it's also time to get a little depressed, because that's what we do. Now, I heard that there are a couple psychology majors in the room, so this might be interesting for you, but studies do show that many of us become more depressed at the time of the holidays, beginning about now, when the days are getting shorter, until sometime in January, February, even until spring. We all are a little bit more sad. Now, that's fascinating to psychologist Dr. Lisa Miller, who said that at any given time, 50% of American adults are a little depressed. Now, let's be clear, I'm not talking about clinical depression. I'm talking about situational depression or seasonal or developmental depression. And Lisa Miller finds that it is quite interesting that we are just a little bit depressed because we live in a time when there is unprecedented food source. We live in a time when we have access to the best medical care in the world. We live in a place that has the highest standard of living of almost anywhere, and yet we're just not happy. And when we're just not happy, we tend to blame somebody else. I'm tired of my job, it's a dead-end job, they don't really appreciate what I do, or I'm tired of my family, or it's gotta be my spouse. You know, if I had a better spouse, I'd definitely have a better life, and my kids are driving me crazy, and all these things happen, and we tend to blame other people. But Miller has been studying depression and spirituality for decades, and she said there is a link between those two things. People who are more depressed are less likely to have spiritual practices in their life. And people who are more spiritually in tune feel a greater sense of purpose and meaning in their life, and they're less likely to become depressed. Now, she got interested in this link between depression and spirituality when she was working in an inpatient ward in Manhattan. And she noticed that on the facility calendar, there was, Easter celebration and Christmas celebration, but there was nothing for Yom Kippur. And this is Manhattan, where much of the population is Jewish. And many of the patients in this facility were Jewish. So she took it upon herself to create a Yom Kippur meal. She planned it, she prepared it, and she invited the whole facility to come to this meal. And of all those who attended, 4 of the most agitated, volatile, treatment-resistant patients came to the Yom Kippur meal. And she said what happened was incredible. They all sat around the table together. And these 4, along with everyone else, said the prayers, and they sang the songs, and they became calm, and they smiled, and they gave thanks. And she could not believe it, because in all forms of treatment, they had never shown that kind of progress ever that they showed at this Yom Kippur meal, just sitting around the table and practicing their faith. Why? Why did they calm at that simple meal? Because they remembered who they were. They remembered their connection with the source of all life. And that is what our prophet Haggai wants his people to experience. Now, thank you so much, Cindy. I know that was a very difficult reading. There are all kinds of words and names in there that are hard to pronounce. But Haggai has a plan, and his plan is to make sure that his people remember who they are. Now, we are studying the minor prophets of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament prophets. And so we started 3 weeks ago with Joel. Last week was Habakkuk. This week is Haggai. They're all prophets, and I want to remind those of you from last week and those who are new that a prophet does not tell the future. A prophet hears from God and tells the people, and almost always the prophet says, "This is the road you are on, and if you continue down this road, you will reap these consequences, and you will not like it. So change course, do something different, act in a different way, make time for God and for one another, and then you will avoid those dire consequences, right? And usually what happens is people either listen to the prophet or they kill them. Pretty much throughout the Bible, that's what happens. So we have to go back a week to Habakkuk to understand what Haggai is talking about today. So last week, do you remember that Habakkuk knew something terrible was going to happen? And he prayed to God and he was waiting. He stationed himself on the wall, on the rampart, and he waited actively for an answer from God. And he used that time to grow his faith and to trust in God. He didn't walk away from his relationship just because God didn't answer fast enough. Now, the thing that was so terrible that was going to happen was the Babylonian army was on its way. They were going to destroy Jerusalem, and they did. They did that. They destroyed the city. The Babylonian army destroyed the temple, reduced it to rubble. They killed many of the Israelites, and they took many of them captive back to Babylon. And they left this remnant of people around this demolished city to farm the land and to kind of keep the wild animals away. 70 years has passed since that happened, okay? 70 years has gone by. And now Haggai is the prophet, and the king of Babylon, the king of Persia, has released the captives to come home to rebuild Jerusalem. So it's an exciting day. But let's do the math. If you are 20 years old, or 40 years old, or 60 years old when you were taken captive, and 70 years have gone by, how many of you are still living? Who's returning? The next generation. There are children that were born in captivity in Babylon, and Babylon's the only life they know. They've never been to Jerusalem before. And they are being released from Babylon by the king and sent to Jerusalem to repair the city. And they've never been there, but they've heard about it. You can be sure that their parents told them all about the glory days, how wonderful it was back then. You know, like our parents do when they say, we had to walk barefoot through 6 miles of snow just to get to school, and you can't get out of bed, right? You can be sure they heard about Jerusalem and how beautiful of a city it was and how magnificent the temple was. So these returning citizens come to Jerusalem and they find a wreck of a city. It's nothing but rubble. It's barely been built up, just a few little places here and there where people have lived in the midst of this destruction, and it's pretty depressing. So they do what most people would do. They begin to build their own house. You start with yourself, right? You go to school, you get the degree, you get the job, you get married, you have the family, and you, at some point when your family is young, you might say, oh gosh, I should probably go back to church. You know, grandma would be happy if I went back to church. That's what they did. They started working on their own homes. And Haggai, the prophet, steps in and he says, hold on. Don't spend all your time building your own house. You've got to come to the Temple Mount, and you've got to rebuild this temple. Now, he's not saying that because he wants people to come back to church. He wants them to rebuild the temple because he knows it's the center of their identity. It tells them who they are as a people. Jewish life revolved around that temple. The sacrifices and the prayers and the words. And if they weren't putting any effort into rebuilding that temple, they were not putting any effort into connecting to God and to creating community. And the people listened to Haggai. And they began to go back to the Temple Mount, and with every stone or rock that they carried up there and they put in place, they were building their heritage again. They were building themselves as a people and as a nation, and it was hard and depressing work. So Haggai came back with more words of encouragement. He is only a prophet for 3 months. If you read the whole book of Haggai, which I think is 2 chapters, it gives you the timeline. He says this, then he says this, then he says this. Then we never hear from this guy again. But he gives them words of encouragement. He says, God is with you. You are not alone in this. Yes, this is really difficult work, but it's worth it. Do not be afraid. Don't worry about how it looks now. Because what's happening is you are being built on the inside as a people. And it's so important for us to do that, to keep our eyes on what can be, and to open ourselves to this connection with the divine. So what was happening as they placed these stones in the foundation of the temple is the same thing that was happening at the Yom Kippur meal in the inpatient ward in Manhattan. People were beginning to remember who they were. They were remembering who their God is. And the rubble around them and the destruction and all the changes and everything that was weighing heavy on their hearts and making them depressed began to fade as they built that time into their lives to connect with God and to connect with one another. That is what Haggai wanted for his people. That is what Lisa Miller discovered when she was working with her people. And that is what God wants us to discover as we are worshiping and being a community together, a family, as Ronaldo said. So today I want to invite you to participate in a very brief spiritual practice because we are laying the stones of our spiritual foundation. So 3 weeks ago, I know that's too long for anybody to remember except me, we talked about Joel and we talked about the locusts and everything the locusts had eaten. And our spiritual practice for that week was just to go outside and look at the expanse of the sky and remember how tiny a locust is. Get some perspective, right? This isn't all about us. This is about something much bigger than us. And we can take a lot of hope in that. When I did that practice at home that day, by the way, this huge ribbon of migrating blackbirds went over me, and it was absolutely amazing. The second week, when we talked about Habakkuk, we lit a candle so that we could remember to wait, to pray and to wait and to stay in communion with God. And I asked you to think about who you would wait with. Who is your partner, living or dead? Who will wait with you in this faith journey? Today, I'm going to ask you to quiet yourselves in a moment, and I'm going to ask a question, and I want you to let your spirit answer the question. Try not to think too hard about it. Just see what rises up in you. What is your heart going to say? So I invite everybody now, let's just breathe in together and breathe out and try to get as comfortable as you can in pews that are not made for comfort. Just center yourself for a moment. Keep breathing in and out. Close your eyes if you're comfortable. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, just soften your gaze. Look at the floor, look at your knees. Give your neighbor some space and some privacy. And as you enter this space of quiet, I want you to imagine a comfortable, beautiful, peaceful place. Maybe it just has a little bit of light. Maybe there's a little bit of sound. Some place where you feel comfortable and safe. And I'm going to ask you a question. And we're going to have a few moments of silence after I ask this question. And I'll ask it a couple of times, but as you stay in this peaceful place, let your spirit answer. What do you love to do? What does your heart love to do? Now come back to the room. Hold that answer that rose up close to your heart. If you didn't hear anything, if you're distracted, if this was a little bit too much for you, just take that question home with you. And tonight, turn off the TV, turn off your phone, and ask your heart, what does it love to do? And give it another opportunity to answer. But whatever it is that rose up in you, that is your spirit, and that is what it needs. And so for your spiritual practice this week, I want you to do that, whatever it was, whether it was just to be with family or to sleep or to take a walk in nature, or to teach, or to speak, or to write, or to create. Whatever that was, whatever your Spirit said to you, do that. And that is laying another stone in the foundation of our temple that we are building through spiritual practice. And as we learn to listen to our Spirit and to do what it invites us to do, we will be happier people. We will connect with God and with one another. And that's why we're here. Amen.